I was setting down the dessert I brought, this fancy raspberry cheesecake I spent all afternoon perfecting, when my dad looked around the room, scanned the table like he was checking for roaches, then said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Well, I guess someone had to invite the failure." A few relatives smirked. My cousin Tyler actually chuckled. I didn't flinch. I didn't say a word. I just took my seat at the far end of the table, folded my hands, and waited. Because what they didn't realize, what not one of them knew, was that tonight wasn't going to end the way they expected. My name's Brian. I'm 31, and for the first time in 6 years, I agreed to attend one of my family's big dinners. Those awkward, passive-aggressive, overly decorated evenings my mom insists on throwing for every minor holiday, like it's a presidential gala. This one was for her birthday, actually, November 8th. A date I used to remember fondly until it became just another excuse for my dad to play ringmaster to our dysfunctional little circus. You should know, I didn't just show up out of the blue. My younger sister, Melissa, had been calling and texting me for weeks, begging me to come. "It's just dinner," she kept saying. "Just come, eat, say hi, please." She's one of the few people in the family who actually treats me like a human being, and I could hear the guilt in her voice every time she brought it up. So eventually, I gave in. Told her I'd come for her. Just dinner, just this once. I didn't expect anything to have changed. And I was right. The moment I stepped through the front door, I knew I'd made a mistake. The house smelled the same, like lavender potpourri and expensive candles that tried too hard. Same piano music playing softly from the speakers. Same old, judgmental faces turning toward me like I was a stray dog that wandered in. Even the way my mom greeted me felt hollow. She came over all smiles, arms outstretched, kissed me on the cheek, and whispered, "Try not to stir anything up tonight, okay?" Before she turned to greet Aunt Janice and acted like I didn't exist. The only reason I brought that cheesecake was because I wanted to contribute something nice. I figured if I was going to be judged, I might as well give them something to judge me for. I even skipped lunch to make sure I had time to chill it properly before driving an hour and a half to get there. No one thanked me when I walked in with it. Not a single person even acknowledged it, until Dad made that little comment. Guess someone had to invite the failure. Just loud enough to float across the table like a balloon filled with poison. The silence afterward was deafening, in that way that tells you everyone heard it, everyone knew it was wrong, but no one was going to say anything about it. That's the kind of house I grew up in, where silence was complicity, and complicity was just another way of surviving. I didn't react. Not then. I just sat down and smiled to myself. Because this time, I didn't come back to play nice. I didn't come back to let them push me around or talk down to me or pretend I wasn't worth the chair I was sitting in. This time, I came back with something they didn't know I had. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why that line from my dad didn't even faze me anymore, you'd have to understand how many times I've heard some version of it. Growing up, he had this way of making you feel small without ever raising his voice. He was the king of disappointed sighs and sarcastic nods. My older brother Kevin was always the achiever, business degree, shiny company car, the kind of guy who posted motivational quotes on LinkedIn. Melissa was the peacemaker, sweet, agreeable, always going along to get along. And then there was me, the artsy one, the drifter, the one who dropped out of law school and dared to build something on his own terms. What they never understood, what they refused to understand, was that I wasn't some lazy burnout. I was building something real, quietly, privately, away from their judgmental stares and behind-the-back whispers. I was running my own tech consulting firm. Nothing flashy, no office downtown, but steady, profitable, grown from the ground up over the last 6 years. But because I didn't wear a suit or show up to family functions with business cards, they assumed I was unemployed. Or worse, just lost. I stopped trying to explain myself a long time ago, because every time I tried, it turned into a lecture. You know you're not getting any younger. It's not too late to go back to school. Kevin's company might have an entry-level spot if you're serious this time. So I stopped coming around. It wasn't just the judgment. It was the way they all seemed to enjoy it. Like my failures made them feel better about themselves. Like watching me struggle was some kind of family pastime. But Melissa kept calling, kept reminding me she missed me, that the kids, her kids, wanted to see Uncle Brian again. So I finally said yes. And that brings us back to the table. That long, polished wood table surrounded by perfectly folded napkins and overpriced wine glasses, where I sat with a polite smile as Dad made me the butt of his opening joke. Kevin, of course, was already holding court at the other end, telling some story about how he handled a difficult client with his usual brand of fake humility. "Oh, it was nothing really," he said, lifting his wine glass. "You just have to know how to talk to these people." Mom was hanging on every word. Uncle Dean nodded along like Kevin had just shared the secret to world peace. And I sat there, invisible, until my dad decided to pull me into the spotlight with that line. Someone had to invite the failure. But I didn't give him the reaction he wanted. No flushed cheeks. No nervous laugh. I just waited. Because the night was young. And the longer I stayed quiet, the more they'd underestimate me. Melissa gave me a sympathetic smile from across the table, but she didn't speak up either. I didn't blame her. She's been the middle child her whole life. Keeping the peace is practically her religion. As the evening went on, the digs kept coming, soft ones at first. My aunt leaned over and asked, "So are you still doing that computer thing?" My cousin Jason chimed in later with, "You know, my buddy tried the whole freelancing thing. Didn't really work out. Tough market out there." Every comment was laced with the same syrupy condescension, and I just kept nodding, smiling, sipping my drink. I had no intention of defending myself, because I had a better plan. One that would unravel slowly, like a thread in a sweater. One that would force them to see me not just as the failure, but as something else entirely. And by the time dessert came out, they'd wish they had treated me differently from the start. But first, I had to let them talk. So I stayed quiet, and they didn't even realize the stage they were setting, until it was too late. Dinner dragged on in the slow, torturous way that only family dinners can, where every minute feels like 10, and every conversation feels like it's being sharpened into a weapon. The room was warm, heavy with the scent of roast chicken, garlic potatoes, and strained politeness. Laughter bubbled up from the other end of the table like bad champagne. Too forced, too loud. I sat at the far end, nodding at all the right times, but mostly just listening. Watching. Waiting. By the time we reached the main course, the digs had evolved. They weren't just passive-aggressive anymore. They were getting bold. Kevin, in particular, seemed to be having a great time at my expense. "So, Brian," he said, swirling his wine with the smugness of a man who practiced his smirk in the mirror. "Still living in that apartment over the mechanic shop? What is it, 700 square feet?" Melissa stiffened. I caught her eye, but gave her the slightest shake of my head. "Don't defend me. Not yet." I smiled. "It's actually 650. Keeps me humble." Kevin snorted. "Guess it saves on heating when your entire place is one room." The laughter was louder this time. Aunt Janice actually slapped the table. Even my mom cracked a smile, though she tried to cover it with her napkin. It was surreal, like watching my own humiliation be passed around like a side dish. I could feel the weight of every stare, every unspoken comparison. Kevin, in his custom blazer and Rolex, held court like a king. I was the jester, the cautionary tale. No matter what I did or how hard I worked, they had already written my role in the family script, and they weren't interested in a rewrite. Brian's always been more of a free spirit, my mom offered at one point, in that tight, sugary voice she used when she wanted to sound supportive but still remind everyone I was a disappointment. "Yeah," Dad added, buttering a roll with surgical precision, free from ambition, free from success, free from basic financial planning. More laughter. I stared at the tablecloth, at the little patterns stitched into it like vines choking a tree. My grip tightened on my fork. The whole room felt like it was closing in. Not one person had asked me how I was doing. Not one person had shown interest in my life, my work, or anything beyond what they could mock. I wasn't even angry at that point. I was just tired. But then it got worse. After dinner, we migrated to the living room for coffee and dessert, my cheesecake. I had brought it out myself, placed it neatly in the center of the buffet table, cut clean slices. It looked perfect. It was perfect. I watched as my mom took a piece, paused, then leaned toward Aunt Janice. "I missed the store-bought one we had last year," she whispered, not quietly enough. I said nothing, just took my slice and sat down. Melissa sat beside me, murmuring, "I'm so sorry, Bree. They're being awful." "It's okay," I said softly. "This is what they do." She shook her head. "You don't deserve it." I didn't respond, because just then, Kevin's voice cut through the room. "We should do gifts now. I got Mom something special." Of course he did. Everyone gathered around as he presented her with a sleek little box from some high-end boutique. She gasped and fawned as she unwrapped a bracelet, gold, with a tiny charm shaped like a key. "For the key to my heart," he said, loud enough for it to be rehearsed. She clutched it to her chest like he'd donated a kidney. "Oh, Kevin," she cooed. "You always know just what I like." I looked down at my hands. They felt heavy. I hadn't brought a gift, just the cheesecake. And apparently, even that wasn't good enough. The next part felt like something out of a script I didn't audition for. My dad cleared his throat. "Actually, while we're all here, I wanted to talk about something important." The room quieted. Everyone turned. "I've been working on my will," he said, smiling thinly. "Nothing morbid, just being practical. I thought it might be nice to let everyone know where things stand, now that we're all," he paused, glancing at me, "together again." I felt my stomach turn cold. "What?" He leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the attention. "So, the house will go to Kevin and his family. It makes the most sense, since they've always been close by. The lake cabin will go to Melissa. God knows she's kept that place alive. And the business, well, Kevin's been shadowing me for years, so he'll take over once I'm gone." The room broke into soft applause, nods, approval, like it was some sort of award ceremony. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My ears were ringing. "And Brian," he added, almost as an afterthought, "you'll get the Mustang." The Mustang. The rusted-out, half-functioning 1967 Mustang he'd been restoring for 15 years. Everyone chuckled. A few even clapped, like it was a joke. Melissa looked at me, horror in her eyes. I just nodded, slowly. It wasn't about the money. I didn't need the house, or the cabin, or the business. I had my own. I had more than they could ever imagine. But it wasn't about the material. It was the message. The utter, deliberate dismissal of my worth. The public humiliation. The fact that they made it a spectacle. The Mustang. That was the breaking point. That's when something inside me shifted. Not snapped. Not exploded. Shifted. Like a lens suddenly coming into focus. Because up until that moment, I had planned to stay quiet. I had planned to leave without saying anything. To let them think what they wanted, because their approval never paid my bills or made me happy. But now I realized that sometimes silence isn't noble. Sometimes silence just lets people keep thinking they're right. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like staying silent. I stood up. The room went quiet. I wasn't dramatic about it. I didn't clear my throat or clink a glass. I just stood and looked around the room slowly, making eye contact with every single person who had laughed, dismissed, or ignored me that night. Then I turned to my dad. "Thank you for the Mustang," I said, my voice calm. "I'll put it next to my Lamborghini." He blinked, confused. "What? Or maybe I'll just sell it. I could use the extra room in the garage. Gets tight with 3 cars. Kevin snorted. "What are you even talking about?" I turned to him, smile still in place. "The cars I bought. With the money I make. From the business I own. You know, the one you all keep calling freelance." That's when the room really went silent. Because I never talked about it. Not once. Not on social media. Not in passing. I kept everything quiet. On purpose. "I didn't come here to brag," I said. "But since we're handing out trophies and carving up legacies, let me just clear something up. I'm not a failure. I don't live above a mechanic's shop. That's a temporary studio I rented while my house in Seattle finishes construction. The house I bought, in cash, last year, after my company cleared 7 figures. A beat. Wait," Kevin said slowly. "You're joking." I pulled out my phone, opened the real estate app, showed him the listing, the price tag, the sold banner. "I don't need your approval," I said. "I never did. I just wanted to see if you'd treat me any differently if you thought I had less than you." I turned to my dad. "You can keep the Mustang." And then I walked out. Or at least I would have, if Melissa hadn't stopped me at the door. "Wait," she whispered. "Brian, wait." Her eyes were wide, her face pale. And then she glanced back at the living room, at our stunned parents, our gaping relatives, and Kevin, who looked like someone had just punched him in the throat. "You can't leave yet," she whispered. "Why not?" "Because Mom didn't tell you what she said before dinner," she said quietly. "About your cheesecake." I frowned. "Yeah, I heard." "No, not that part." She swallowed. "She told Kevin not to worry," Melissa said. "Because tonight, she was going to make sure you finally stayed out of the will." I stood there in the hallway, Melissa's words ricocheting around my skull like a loose screw in a tin can. Mom told Kevin she was going to make sure you stayed out of the will. The air around me felt thick, heavy, like something invisible had been pressing down on my chest this whole evening, and I'd finally realized what it was. I wasn't just excluded. I wasn't just dismissed. They wanted me to fail. They needed it. It made them feel righteous, superior, like their choices were justified, like staying in line, marrying safe, and obeying every family expectation had somehow won. I guess someone had to invite the failure. And if you don't have one, you make one. I didn't go back into that living room. I didn't demand an explanation or start a scene. I didn't yell or cry or slam the door. I just nodded to Melissa, gave her a small smile, and said, "Thanks for telling me." Then I walked out into the cold November air, cheesecake still sitting untouched on the table, surrounded by people who never really knew me and never cared to. The drive back to my place was quiet. Not just outside, but inside. No music. No thoughts. Just silence. Not the peaceful kind, either. The kind that sits in your chest like wet cement. I stared ahead at the dark road, the taillights, the faint reflection of my own face in the windshield, and kept replaying it over and over. I shouldn't have gone. I should have known better. And the worst part was, I did know better. I just hoped this time might be different. That maybe years of distance and growth and success would have changed something. Anything. It hadn't. If anything, they resented me more for not needing them. And it wasn't until I pulled into the gravel driveway behind my temporary studio that it really hit me. I had no one. Not in the traditional sense, anyway. My parents clearly saw me as a burden, or worse, an embarrassment. Kevin saw me as a punchline. Most of the extended family followed their lead. Melissa was the only one who ever made an effort, and I knew, deep down, she'd always be split between loyalty and survival. So yeah, rock bottom. That night was pretty close. I didn't sleep much. Just sat on the edge of my bed with the light off, staring at the faint outline of that damn Mustang poster my dad gave me years ago when he used to be proud of me. "One day we'll fix up the real thing together," he'd said. He never meant it. The car sat in his garage for 15 years, gathering dust. Just like any hope of fatherly pride. I let go of something that night. Something that needed to die. I stopped chasing approval. And in its place, I started something else. Not revenge. Not bitterness. Just purpose. A quiet kind of fire. In the weeks that followed, I turned inward. Not in the sad, self-pitying way. I focused. I threw myself into my work like it was the only thing keeping me upright. And maybe it was. I stopped trying to keep tabs on the family. I muted the group chat. I unfollowed Kevin. I let calls from Mom go to voicemail. And every time I felt that familiar tug, the guilt, the need to explain myself, I reminded myself what they actually thought of me. Failure. I poured that energy into my company. For context, I run a back-end security consultancy. It's not flashy. I don't wear a suit or speak on panels. I work with medium-sized companies that are growing fast and terrified of data breaches. I'd built it slowly over the past 6 years, first as a freelancer, then as a two-man team, and eventually into a remote crew of 10. It was always sustainable, but after that dinner, I wanted more. I needed more. So I scaled. Hard. I restructured our pricing models. Picked up 2 enterprise clients. Hired a marketing lead. Doubled our monthly revenue by the end of Q1. The Mustang jokes turned into fuel. The freelancer, Snipes, became a scoreboard. Every time I closed a deal, I thought of my dad buttering his roll and calling me free from ambition. And it wasn't just business. I started rebuilding me. I bought a gym membership. Not because I suddenly wanted six-pack abs, but because I needed discipline, something physical to go with the mental. I stopped eating like a raccoon at midnight. Cut back on the coffee. Started going on long, silent walks after dinner. No phone, just my thoughts. I unfollowed anyone on social media who made me feel small or bitter or envious. I didn't need to watch other people live their lives. I was building my own. One of the first real moments of clarity came during a random Tuesday Zoom call. I was pitching a custom firewall package to a prospective client, a mid-sized e-commerce platform with a bad history of plug-and-play solutions. I walked them through the architecture, explained the vulnerabilities they hadn't noticed, and laid out a 3-month roadmap. When I finished, the CEO leaned back, smiled, and said, "This is the most confident presentation we've seen. You clearly know your stuff." And I believed him. For the first time in years, I actually believed someone who complimented me. Because he had no reason to lie. He didn't know my history, didn't have a stake in my family drama. He didn't want to prop me up or tear me down. He just saw me for what I was. That deal closed. So did the next one. By summer, my company had doubled again. I upgraded my workspace, moved out of the apartment above the mechanic shop into a sleek industrial loft downtown. I designed every inch of it myself. Clean, minimalist. Walls painted a soft charcoal gray, with deep walnut desks and large framed prints of vintage blueprints. Every corner of that place felt like mine. And then came the call. Late August. Warm evening. I just poured myself a drink when my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in months. Brian. Honey, Mom said on the other end. Her voice syrupy again. It's been too long. It always starts like that. I said nothing. Just waited. We're having a little family get-together next month. Nothing big. Just dinner. I thought, maybe you'd like to come. I stared out the window at the skyline, watching the lights flicker across the buildings like a silent orchestra. Why? I asked. She hesitated. What do you mean? I mean, last time I came to dinner, I was called a failure. Publicly. And then you announced you were cutting me out of the will. More silence. That was a misunderstanding, she said quickly. Your father was just joking. No, he wasn't. Well, she sighed, that's just how he is. You know that. Don't be so sensitive. There it was. The dismissal. The gaslighting. The reminder that I was the problem for reacting, not them for attacking. I almost hung up, but then something inside me clicked. All right, I said. I'll come. A beat. You will. Sure. It'll be nice to catch up. I hung up before she could say anything else. Then I poured myself another drink, leaned back in my chair, and started drafting a plan. Because I wasn't going just to eat their roast chicken and pretend we were one big happy family. I was going to show them what a real legacy looks like. The invitation came 2 weeks later in the form of a Facebook event titled Family Appreciation Dinner, hosted by Carol and Frank. That's my mom and dad. It was classic Carol. She tried to make it sound like some wholesome community event, not the stiff, ego-driven family dinner I knew it would be. The kind of night where everyone brought dishes but only certain people were thanked, where accomplishments were toasted if they fit the family narrative, and where anyone who didn't show up with a smile and a story about how great Kevin was got talked about like a tragic case study. I stared at the event page for a while. The RSVP list was exactly what I expected. Kevin and his wife, of course, Uncle Dean and Aunt Janice, Cousin Tyler, Melissa, and her husband Tom, even distant relatives I hadn't seen in 5 years. And at the bottom, a little going next to my name. I hadn't clicked it. Mom had. Cute. But it didn't matter. I was already planning to attend. Only this time, I wasn't walking in with a cheesecake and quiet hopes for civility. This time, I was walking in with intention. The first thing I did was call Melissa. She picked up on the second ring. Brian. Hey, I said. Got a minute? Yeah, of course. What's up? I got the invite. There was a pause. Then, I was hoping you wouldn't see it. I leaned back in my chair, tapping the edge of my desk. Why? Because I know what they're doing. Mom's been talking about you more lately. Too much. It's weird. Like she's trying to act like nothing happened. Like they didn't trash you in front of everyone. I smiled. Melissa was sharp when she wasn't busy walking on eggshells. I think they're trying to reel me back in, I said. They don't like that I'm separate now. You mean successful? Sure, I said. That too. There was another pause. So what are you going to do? I glanced at the blueprint hanging above my desk. My company's network structure. 10 nodes, for secure clients, 2 under audit. I'm going to play along, I said. Smile. Sit through dinner. Let them pretend I'm family again. And then I'm going to turn the lights on. Brian. Not like that. I said quickly. I'm not burning anything down. I just want to rearrange the furniture a little. She laughed, nervous, but genuine. You're cryptic when you're plotting. Only when it's fun. Melissa hesitated. Can I help? That made me pause. She'd always been neutral ground. Switzerland in a sweater. But in that moment, she sounded like someone who was tired of covering for people. Someone who finally wanted to pick a side. Actually, I said slowly, yeah, you can. And just like that, I had an ally. Step 1 was simple. Information. I needed to know what I was walking into. Who would be there, what the seating would look like, what kind of celebration they were staging. Melissa sent me a photo of the group chat the next day, where Mom had outlined everything down to the centerpiece flowers and the font for the printed menu. Yes, there was a menu. Kevin, of course, was giving a speech. A few words of reflection and appreciation for the family's legacy, as Mom put it. There was also a slideshow planned, photos pulled from family albums, holiday cards, and apparently Kevin's wedding. Mine wasn't mentioned. Not that I expected it to be. They'd conveniently forgotten that chapter years ago. The more I read, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't a dinner. It was a coronation. Kevin was being publicly named the future patriarch, the next leader of the family. Dad was going to pass him the torch, probably in the form of some speech about tradition and responsibility, maybe even hand him the keys to the lake cabin in some performative gesture. And I was expected to be there, smiling in the corner, silent and grateful just to be included. I'd seen enough. Step 2. Timing. I had 3 weeks. 3 weeks to prepare something that wouldn't just make a statement, but shift the ground beneath them. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. Because here's the truth. I didn't want revenge just to get even. I wanted to expose the rot. Not by yelling. Not by accusing. By holding up a mirror. So I made a few calls. The first was to my friend Julian, a software engineer I used to work with before I launched my own company. He now ran a boutique AV consulting firm and had helped me design the secure media rooms for 3 of my clients. Tell me something, I asked. How hard would it be to set up a wireless audio relay in a private residence? He paused. Legal or hypothetical? I smiled. Let's say, family dinner. I want to listen to what they say when I'm not in the room. Ah, he said. Old school eavesdropping. Should be easy. What? Just want to confirm something I already know. Julian was in. And so was the tech. Step 3. Proof. It wasn't enough to show up with a speech or some receipts. That would make me look defensive. Paranoid, even. I needed the truth to come out without me forcing it. I needed them to reveal themselves. So Melissa helped me plan it. A discreet lav mic under the drinks cabinet in the living room, connected to a tiny transmitter in the vent. No one noticed. No one ever does when the lighting's cozy and the wine's flowing. We tested it 3 days before the event. Crystal clear. I told Melissa to let the conversations flow naturally. If they talked about me, especially if it was anything like last time, I'd have it. And I did. 2 nights before the dinner, I received the full audio file. 3 hours of casual cruelty. Mom, just smile and be nice to him. He doesn't need to know we're changing the trust. Dad, it's not like he'd understand it anyway. Kid couldn't even finish law school. Kevin, we're doing him a favor, really. He'd just waste the money. Probably on one of his startups. Aunt Janice. Honestly, I think he likes being the underdog. Gives him something to sulk about. Uncle Dean. Well, he better not cause a scene. Carol's already nervous he'll try to turn the dinner into a therapy session. I sat in silence for 10 full minutes after listening. Not out of shock. Out of clarity. This was who they were. This was the story they told themselves to justify every exclusion, every jab, every seat at the table I wasn't offered. And now? Now I had proof. Step 4. Stagecraft. I emailed the AV company I use for my client events and had them deliver a portable setup. Hidden speakers, smart projector, wireless controller, all routed through a secure hub in my backpack. It looked like nothing more than a laptop sleeve. I tested it in my loft the day before the dinner. Smooth. Seamless. The final piece was the slideshow. The one Mom had been preparing, full of carefully selected photos of family legacy. Kevin in a cap and gown. Kevin with his wife. Kevin holding Dad's hand at the cabin like they were passing down a throne. Melissa got me access. I found the file on Mom's laptop, she said. It's awful. It's like you don't even exist. I wasn't surprised, but I had an idea. Send it to me, I said, and make sure they don't touch it again before the dinner. She paused. What are you going to do? Just making a few edits. By the time I finished, the slideshow looked identical. Same photos, same music, same timeline. But buried inside, every 8th slide was quietly replaced with something else. A quote, a bank statement, a contract, a screenshot of a public Forbes article referencing my work on a secure communications framework, images of my Seattle property, my team's Christmas photo. Nothing flashy, just undeniable. Proof that I existed. Proof that I thrived. By the time the dinner rolled around, I was ready. I showed up in a charcoal wool blazer and a navy crew neck. No tie, no labels. Clean. Confident. I carried nothing but a sleek backpack and a bottle of wine from a vineyard I owned a share in. The house looked the same. Same potted plants. Same lavender scent. Same carefully coordinated chaos. Mom greeted me like nothing had ever happened. Air kiss. Fake smile. Brian, sweetie. So glad you could make it. Kevin offered a nod, like we were business associates who once shared a bad lunch. I smiled at everyone, because I already knew how the night would end. They sat me at the far end of the dining table again. Same chair. Same linen napkin. Same passive-aggressive smile from Mom as she handed me the printed menu like I should be grateful just to be breathing the same air as her chosen heir. Kevin was already 2 glasses of wine in, flashing that polished smile of his, the one that never reached his eyes. He looked relaxed, comfortable, like someone who already knew how the night would end. Why wouldn't he? He'd been handed everything. Dad's praise, Mom's affection, the lake cabin, the future of the family business, and now, tonight, the symbolic crown. Only this time, he wasn't the only one who came prepared. Dinner went about how I expected. Forced conversation. Polite chuckles. Melissa across the table giving me subtle glances to make sure I was still breathing. I stayed quiet, played my role, laughed at the appropriate times, and asked Cousin Tyler about his new job. He said something about real estate marketing and then pivoted into a backhanded compliment about how Brian's probably great at websites and stuff. Sure, Tyler. After the 3rd course, Mom stood and clinked her glass, smiling that brittle, over-rehearsed smile she always used when trying to control a room. Everyone, she said, thank you for being here. This evening is very special to us. Not just because we get to have our whole family together, a small glance toward me, but because we're also marking an important chapter, a new beginning. She gestured toward Kevin. Frank and I have talked a lot about legacy, about family, and we're so proud of everything our son has become. She was glowing. Kevin did that slow, humble head nod thing he probably practiced in the mirror. The whole table clapped, like it was his graduation all over again. Dad stood next. Kevin's been by my side for years now. He stepped up. He understands responsibility. And we think it's time he take on more, formally. So tonight, we're passing the torch. Starting with this. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a manila envelope. The kind you only use when something needs to feel important. These, he said, are the title transfer documents for the lake cabin. Kevin stood up, pretending to be surprised. Dad, seriously? Mom nodded. You've earned it. Kevin opened the envelope, holding it like it was the 10 Commandments. I could see Melissa tense beside her husband. She glanced at me again, like asking, is this it? I gave her the smallest nod. Let it happen. Let the stage rise just a bit higher. Let the throne settle under him. They finished their little coronation with more clapping, a round of toasts, and the announcement that Kevin would be delivering a short speech of appreciation before dessert. That was my cue. I stood up slowly, lifting my glass. I actually brought something too, I said calmly, tapping the side of the wine glass for attention. Before Kevin speaks. Heads turned. Some confused. Some suspicious. Dad narrowed his eyes slightly, but said nothing. Kevin looked amused. Something simple, I continued. Just a few memories. I figured, if we're celebrating family legacy, it might be nice to remember where we all came from. Mom blinked. What are you talking about? I reached into my bag and pulled out the slim remote, clicked it once, and the living room wall lit up with the projector I had set up earlier, hidden behind the sideboard cabinet. The slideshow started automatically. Soft piano music played. First few slides were exactly what they expected. Baby photos. Family barbecues. Kevin at his high school graduation. Melissa holding her firstborn. Laughter. Smiles. Nostalgia. Everyone relaxed. Then came slide 9. A quote in white letters against a black screen. Just smile and be nice to him. He doesn't need to know we're changing the trust. Carol. The room froze. At first, no one said anything. Maybe they thought it was a mistake. A misquote. But the next slide sealed it. A time-stamped audio waveform. Beneath it, text read. It's not like he'd understand it anyway. Kid couldn't even finish law school. Frank. Kevin stood abruptly. What is this? I clicked again. Slide 11. A high-res screenshot of a transcript. Audio pulled from the very conversation 2 nights before, crystal clear, Dad's voice unmistakable. Then Mom's. Then Kevin's. Every insult. Every betrayal. We're doing him a favor, really. He'd just waste the money. Gasps now. Aunt Janice whispering, oh my God, while Melissa covered her mouth. Her husband Tom just stared straight ahead, frozen. Mom's voice trembled. Brian, what is this? I met her eyes. The truth. Next slide. A simple collage of headlines from business sites, articles referencing my company's growth, contracts signed, awards granted. My name, Brian Caldwell, founder and CEO, Vigil SEC Technologies, in bold letters across a TechCrunch piece. Then a slide showing the interior of my Seattle home. Zillow screenshots. Purchase records. All public. All real. Then a photo of me and my team in front of our downtown office. The date in the corner, March 3rd, 2 weeks after the dinner where I was called a failure. And then, quiet. Just the music playing. I clicked one final time. The screen went black. One last quote. He's not the failure. You are. Future me. I set the remote down and let the silence stretch. Kevin looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. Dad's face had gone pale, his mouth a thin, angry line. Mom just stared at the screen like it had personally betrayed her. Aunt Janice was the first to speak. Carol, is that real? Mom opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. It was taken out of context. Melissa scoffed. Loudly. No, she said. It wasn't. All eyes turned to her. She asked me not to tell Brian. Melissa said, standing up. She told Kevin before the last dinner that they were cutting Brian out completely. Not because he needed to be. Not because he did anything wrong. Just because it made them feel better. Kevin shook his head, his voice rising. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I do, Melissa snapped. I heard all of it. I helped plant the mic. Kevin's mouth clamped shut. Dad finally spoke, his voice low and tight. This is manipulative. You're trying to humiliate us. No, I said. I'm trying to show you what humiliation feels like. I looked at each of them. Because that's what you've been doing to me for years. Quietly, publicly, jokingly, strategically. You made me the family's cautionary tale. You needed me to fail to justify everything you gave Kevin. And I let it happen. I stayed away. I stayed silent. But not anymore. I turned to Kevin. You're not the legacy. You're just loud. Then to Dad. You say I have no ambition. But I built something from scratch that you don't even understand. And finally to Mom. You said I wouldn't notice. That I didn't need to know. But I did. And now everyone else does too. I picked up my wine glass, took a slow sip, and smiled. Oh, and by the way, I added, about the lake cabin, you might want to check the deed. Dad blinked. What are you talking about? I bought the land 2 months ago. Neighbor was selling. It borders your east property line. Turns out the old survey was wrong. That doc you love so much. It's on my land now. Gasps. Kevin stepped forward. You're lying. I pulled out the printed map and dropped it on the table. County clerk approved it last week. Want me to call them? Silence. Then Melissa started clapping. Slow. Sarcastic. Cathartic. One by one, a few others joined. Not everyone, but enough. I looked around the room, at the faces that used to make me feel small. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't need anything from them anymore. I turned to Melissa. You coming? She nodded without hesitation. Tom stood too. They gathered their things while Mom sat in stunned silence. The slideshow frozen behind her on the quote. He's not the failure. You are. I walked out of that house with my sister by my side and a quiet pride in my chest. The kind that doesn't need applause, or inheritance, or forgiveness. Just freedom. We got into my car. Yes, the real one. And drove off into the night. The taillights glowing behind us like 2 small fires burning everything I left behind. And I never looked back.